My name is Claudine Harris. I am 64 years old, and I will never forget the sound of my own son's voice cutting me open in front of everyone I had ever loved. The church was full that Saturday afternoon, the air thick with perfume cologne and the scent of lilies pressed into vases at the altar. Stained glass spilled color onto the polished wooden pews, and hundreds of guests shifted in their seats, whispering about how handsome Derek looked in his tuxedo, how beautiful Monique appeared in her silk gown. I sat in the second row, hands folded tightly in my lap, wearing the lavender dress I had bought months earlier, the one I thought would mark me as the proud mother of the groom. My chest swelled with fragile hope. For weeks, I had told myself this wedding would be the day my sacrifices were acknowledged, the day my only son would finally recognize me not just as the woman who raised him, but as the mother who had given everything so that he could stand there in that moment. When Derek rose to speak microphone in hand, the congregation fell silent. His smile was bright, his voice clear, and for the first few sentences he spoke the words I had dreamed of hearing. He thanked the guests, thanked Monique's parents for their support, thanked God for bringing them together. My eyes blurred with tears of pride. Then he turned his head toward me, his tone shifting, his lips curling with something sharper than love. "And of course I need to thank my mother," he said, pausing just long enough for me to sit a little straighter. "She tried her best, I guess. But let's be real, everything I am today, everything worth celebrating comes from my father's side. My mother gave me nothing compared to what Dad would have given. She never mattered in the same way, and it is time to stop pretending she did." The words struck like a hammer blow. Gasps rippled through the crowd, some muffled laughter slipped from the back rows, and I felt every eye land on me at once. My face burned, my pulse throbbed in my ears, and the lavender fabric that had felt like a shield only moments before now felt like a spotlight marking me for humiliation. The videographer's camera swiveled toward me, capturing my expression as I sat frozen, trapped in the pew, like a prisoner in her own son's trial. Derek laughed lightly as if it were just a joke, then moved on with his speech, praising Monique, praising himself, never once returning his gaze to me. I wanted to vanish. My throat closed around the lump that swelled, my vision narrowed, and the album I had brought filled with photographs of Derek as a baby. Derek at his first basketball game. Derek in his cap and gown at Georgia Tech slipped from my lap onto the polished floor with a thud that echoed like a gavel striking judgment. I bent to pick it up, but my hands shook so violently I could barely grasp the leather cover. When I lifted my head, I saw Monique smirking at me from the altar, her manicured hand resting possessively on my son's arm. Her eyes flicked over me with disdain, a silent message that I was unwelcome, that I was no longer part of the family being formed in front of that congregation. It was not just Derek's words that shattered me. It was the way his new wife claimed victory in that moment, as though humiliating me was part of their vow to each other. The silence around me grew unbearable. I heard whispers. Did he really say that, poor woman? How cruel. But none of them reached out. None of them broke the spell of shame that pressed me deeper into the pew. My entire life, every night shift worked. Every dollar saved, every dream sacrificed seemed to collapse into dust. I was not the proud mother of the groom. I was the burden my son had just disowned in public. Slowly, deliberately, I rose from my seat. My knees trembled, my palms slick with sweat, but I forced myself to stand. The wooden pew creaked under the shift of my weight, and heads turned as I stepped into the aisle. The church was so quiet, I could hear the soft echo of my heels striking the tile, each step a drumbeat of humiliation. I clutched the photo album to my chest as though it might hold me together, but inside I was already breaking apart. When I reached the heavy doors at the back of the sanctuary, I paused. For one desperate heartbeat, I hoped Derek would stop me, that he would call out, "Wait, Mom, I didn't mean it." But no such words came. He continued his speech oblivious, wrapped in applause that sounded hollow and cruel to my ears. I pushed open the door, and the afternoon sunlight hit me like a slap. The warm Texas air wrapped around me, mocking me with its brightness as I stumbled down the stone steps. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted from the reception hall nearby. and I realized with devastating clarity that life inside that church would continue without me, that my absence meant nothing. Standing in the parking lot surrounded by gleaming cars decorated with ribbons and tin cans ready to be tied to the back of Derek's limousine, I pressed the album to my chest and let the tears fall freely. Each drop burned down my cheeks, carrying years of disappointment and unspoken pain. I had given everything to raise my son. I had believed this day would finally bring recognition. Instead, it stripped me bare in front of strangers. In that moment, under the brutal sun, a truth began to form inside me, a truth that would grow stronger with every breath I took. I realized that love without respect is not love at all, that sacrifice without gratitude is not noble but destructive. I realized that the boy I had raised was no longer my son, at least not in the sense that mattered. He had chosen to sever that bond with his own words, and now I had to decide what I would do with the power still left in my hands. I did not know yet what shape my revenge would take. I only knew that this was the last day I would ever allow Derek Harris to treat me like less than I was. When I finally reached my car that afternoon, I slid into the driver's seat and gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles whitened. My chest heaved, and for several minutes I simply sat there trying to breathe through the ache that clawed at my lungs. The laughter from inside the church drifted through the open windows, each burst of joy like a knife twisting deeper. I could not bring myself to start the engine. I stared at the album still clutched in my lap, the leather cover stained with a tear that had fallen without my noticing. Those pictures were my proof of a life spent pouring everything I had into my son, and now they mocked me. I thought back to the nights when Derek was small fever burning through his body, and I sat awake with cool cloths pressed to his forehead. I remembered the hours I worked in the emergency ward, rushing from patient to patient, knowing that every shift I accepted meant another meal on our table. Another bill paid another step toward the education I promised my child he would have. I had believed those sacrifices would build something unshakable between us, a bond no one could break. Instead, they had become invisible, dismissed with a single cruel sentence at the altar. Driving home, the streets blurred. I barely noticed the lights, the cars, the faces of pedestrians as I made my way through Houston's late afternoon traffic. I pulled into my driveway, the house sitting small but proud against the fading sun. This house was my crown jewel. I had bought it when Derek was 9, after years of saving every extra penny from my paycheck. While others took vacations or bought new cars, I put money into a savings account and lived modestly so that my son could have a home where he felt safe. I paid every mortgage bill, patched every roof leak, painted every wall. And now, as I stepped inside, silence pressed down on me like a weight. The walls no longer felt like protection. They felt like reminders of a life lived for someone who had just declared me worthless. I wandered into the living room and sank onto the couch. The late sunlight filtered through lace curtains, painting patterns on the carpet, where Derek once played with toy cars. I closed my eyes and could almost hear his young voice. "Mama, watch me, watch me." I had always watched. I had always been there. But when it was my turn to be seen, he had looked through me as though I were nothing more than a shadow. That night, sleep refused to come. Memories surged instead. I remembered working double shifts so Derek could attend Georgia Tech tuition, costing nearly $100,000, every dollar scraped together through endless hours in scrubs and sneakers. I remembered selling the small diamond earrings my late husband had given me just to cover the down payment on Derek's first car. I remembered taking out a loan against my retirement savings to help him cover rent when he struggled during his early career. Each memory was a blade. Each reminder of sacrifice was another cut in a body already raw. By dawn, my eyes burned with exhaustion, but my resolve began to take shape. I knew I could not ignore what had happened. To do so would be to betray myself to confirm the lie that I was nothing more than a burden. I went to my bedroom and opened the small safe in my closet. Inside were documents I had not touched in years, my will, my insurance policies, the folder with receipts from investments I had carefully managed since my husband Raymond died nearly 2 decades earlier. I lifted the papers out and spread them across my bed. My hands trembled not from weakness but from the first stirrings of power. The numbers stared back at me. Between my home, my retirement funds, and the investments I had guarded, I had amassed nearly $3 million in assets. For years, I had comforted myself with the thought that at least Derek would never struggle the way I had, that he would inherit security and comfort when my time came. But now the very idea of handing him that gift filled me with bitterness. Why should someone who humiliated me in public, who reduced decades of sacrifice to nothing, be rewarded with everything I had built? I poured coffee into a chipped mug and sat at the kitchen table staring at the steam as it curled upward. My mind drifted back to the months leading up to the wedding. There had been warning signs I chose to ignore. Monique had once told me with a smile too sharp to be kind that Derek and she needed space from me after the wedding, that young couples shouldn't have parents hovering. Derek had brushed me off when I asked how I could help with planning, telling me Monique's parents had everything covered. At the time, I convinced myself it was normal that my role was simply to show up and smile. But now I saw it clearly. I had been excluded, dismissed, and prepared for this final act of erasure. I thought about calling Derek demanding an apology, demanding he correct what he had done. But the memory of his smirk, the certainty in his tone when he dismissed me, told me the truth. He did not see what he had done as wrong. He had no intention of making it right. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to reclaim my dignity, I would have to seize it myself. In the afternoon, I dialed a number I had not used in years. Janet Lewis, my old friend and attorney, answered with the same calm, commanding voice I remembered. Claudine. My goodness, it's been a while. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. Janet, I need to change my will. There was silence for a moment, then her voice sharpened. Something happened, didn't it? I told her everything, my words tumbling like stones, heavy and unstoppable. When I finished, Janet let out a long breath. Claudine, you've carried him for far too long. Respect isn't given, it's demanded. If your son disrespected you in public, why would you reward him in private? Let's meet tomorrow. Bring your documents. Hanging up, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since the wedding, I was not drowning. I was swimming towards something, a decision, a course of action. It terrified me, but it also filled me with strength. That evening, as I prepared dinner for myself, just a simple bowl of rice and beans, I realized how small my world had become. So many years had been devoted to Derek's needs, to his dreams, to his comfort, that I had forgotten my own. I stared at the empty chair across from me and whispered, "No more." Later, I walked through the house, touching the furniture, the photographs, the mementos of a life lived in service to a son who no longer valued me. Each touch hardened my resolve. If Derek believed I was nothing, I would show him how wrong he was. If Monique believed she had won by claiming him, I would prove her victory hollow. I would not shout. I would not beg. I would use the tools they could not fight: the law, the power of money, the weight of legacy. As I climbed into bed that night, the documents once again spread across my nightstand, I knew this was only the beginning. The pain was still raw, the humiliation still sharp, but underneath it all burned a new determination. I would take back control. I would no longer be the silent mother in the pew, the invisible woman behind the sacrifices. I would become something they could not ignore, the author of their consequences. And as sleep finally pulled me under, one thought echoed again and again in my mind. Derek may have humiliated me at his wedding, but I would have the final word in my will. The morning after my call with Janet, I woke earlier than usual. The sun was just rising, washing the sky in muted gold, but my thoughts were already racing. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, yet my spirit hummed with a new kind of energy, the kind that comes when a person finally accepts they've reached a breaking point. I dressed carefully, pulling on a crisp blouse and slacks instead of the house clothes I usually wore. Today, I told myself I was no longer just a mother trying to hold a family together. Today, I was a woman reclaiming her dignity. I gathered the documents into a neat folder: the current will, the insurance policies, the investment statements. My hands lingered on the envelope that held the deed to the house, the same house I had bought after years of saving the house where Derek had grown up. The weight of it was more than paper. It was decades of sacrifice condensed into a thin manila pouch. I placed it carefully into my purse and locked the door behind me. Driving downtown, my reflection in the rearview mirror startled me. There was a hardness in my eyes I hadn't seen before, a glint of resolve that cut through the sorrow. For years, I had let Derek's needs define my life. For years, I had convinced myself that motherhood meant endless giving, that I could endure any slight because the bond of blood would redeem it in the end. But there was no redemption in what he had done at that altar. He had severed something sacred, and I would be a fool to stitch it back together with more gifts, more forgiveness, more silence. Janet's office sat on the 12th floor of a glass building overlooking the city. As I stepped out of the elevator, my heart pounded not from fear, but from anticipation. Janet met me in the waiting room, her silver hair pulled into a sleek bun, her eyes sharp and assessing. She embraced me briefly, then guided me into her office lined with law books and framed certificates. The smell of polished wood and leather carried the weight of authority. I laid the folder on her desk, sliding the documents across. I want to rewrite everything I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Derek and Monique are to be cut out completely. Janet arched a brow but did not look surprised. She opened the folder, scanning the pages with practiced efficiency. 3 million in assets, she murmured. That is no small estate. She looked up, her gaze steady. What do you want to do with it? The question silenced me for a moment. In the quiet, my thoughts turned to Raymond, my late husband, who had believed in education as the great equalizer. I thought of my years as a nurse of the young students I had mentored who could not afford tuition but fought tooth and nail for every opportunity. My lips parted and the answer came without hesitation. A scholarship, I said, for young nurses, especially those from backgrounds like mine. I want my name and Raymond's name tied to something that builds, not destroys. Janet's expression softened. That, she said, is dignity. That is legacy. She pulled a fresh set of documents from her drawer and began typing. The rhythmic click of her keyboard filled the room as the new will took shape. With each line drafted, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. When she finally slid the papers toward me, my heart raced. I read every word carefully, my eyes tracing the legal language that declared my son disinherited, my wealth redirected. The pen in my hand felt heavy as I poised it over the signature line. For a moment, doubt whispered, was I betraying my role as a mother? But then, Derek's voice rang in my memory, cruel and dismissive. She never mattered in the same way. My grip tightened. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed. The ink flowed smoothly, final and irreversible. As I set the pen down, Janet placed her hand over mine. You've done something powerful, she said. This isn't revenge. This is justice. You've taken the respect he denied you and written it into history. Walking out of the office, I felt taller, lighter. The city stretched before me, the hum of traffic and voices alive with possibility. For the first time in decades, I wasn't just living for Derek. I was living for myself. But empowerment never comes without confrontation. That evening, as I returned home, a black sedan pulled into my driveway behind me. Derek stepped out, his tuxedo replaced with a wrinkled shirt, his face stormy. Monique followed her heels, clicking angrily on the pavement. My stomach tightened, but I squared my shoulders. He stormed up the walkway before I could reach the door. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" he barked. The bank called. The lawyer called. "You're changing your will!" His voice was sharp with outrage, not remorse. Monique crossed her arms, glaring at me as though I were an intruder in my own home. I stood at the threshold, keys in my hand, the weight of the newly signed documents in my purse. "Yes," I said evenly. "I am." Derek's face twisted. "You can't do this. That money is supposed to be mine. You raised me. You owe me." My voice rose for the first time, years of swallowed silence breaking free. "I owe you nothing but the truth, Derek. And the truth is a son who humiliates his mother in public deserves nothing from her in private." His mouth opened closed, then opened again, but no words came. Monique stepped forward, her tone dripping with venom. "You'll regret this, Claudine. People will think you're bitter, spiteful. You'll die alone and no one will remember you." I laughed, a sharp, unexpected sound. "On the contrary," I said, "I will be remembered. Every nurse who receives the Harris Scholarship will know my name. Every life they save will carry my legacy. Tell me, Monique, what will you and Derek be remembered for? A cruel joke at a wedding." The color drained from her face. Derek looked away, his jaw clenched. The The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Finally, without another word, they turned and stalked back to their car. The engine roared, tires screeching as they sped away. I remained standing at the doorway, my heart pounding, but a strange calm washing over me. The confrontation had not broken me. It had cemented me. For years, I had been afraid of losing my son, afraid of being alone. But the truth was, I had already lost him long ago the moment he chose contempt over gratitude. That night, as I set the signed will into the safe, I felt an unshakable certainty settle in my bones. I had crossed a line and there was no going back. My life was no longer defined by what I gave up for Derek. It was defined by what I had reclaimed for myself. And deep inside, a quiet fire burned. He thought his words at that altar were the final judgment. He was wrong. The final word would always be mine. The days after that confrontation with Derek and Monique were unlike any I had ever lived before. For the first time in years, I woke with a sense of clarity, my body no longer sagging under the weight of obligations to people who only drained me. Yet alongside that clarity, a simmering fire burned anger that demanded not only recognition, but also consequence. Cutting Derek from my will was not the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning, one that would stretch beyond my front door and into the community that had once whispered about my humiliation. Word spread quickly. In a family like ours, news traveled faster than truth. Cousins called, some feigning sympathy, others demanding explanations. "You're really cutting Derek out of everything," one cousin asked, her tone more scandalized than concerned. I answered simply, "Yes. A mother deserves respect. Without it, there is nothing." The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. They were shocked, but beneath the shock was admiration. I could feel it. Meanwhile, Derek tried to spin the story his way. He told relatives I had lost my mind, that Monique's family had stepped in to provide what I never could, that his cruel words at the wedding had been nothing more than a joke. But the footage betrayed him. The wedding videographer who had captured every moment had already posted a highlight reel on social media. There for the world to see was Derek's smirk, his voice dismissing me as nothing, the way Monique's eyes glittered with triumph as she clung to his arm. I hadn't planned on using the footage, but I didn't need to. Guests began sharing it themselves, disgusted by what they had witnessed. Comments flooded in. How could a son speak to his mother like that? Unbelievable disrespect. That woman deserves better. What Derek and Monique had hoped would vanish into the noise of wedding laughter instead became a viral stain on their reputation. But public humiliation was not enough for me. For decades, I had built security brick by brick, dollar by dollar, never letting myself rest because I knew no one else would provide for me. Now I wanted to take that security and wield it like a sword. Janet and I met again this time in the conference room of her office, where she spread out options for the scholarship fund. "You have choices," she said. "We can partner with a local university, or we can establish a private foundation in your name. Either way, this will be ironclad." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "I want permanence," I said. "Something that cannot be undone. Something Derek can never touch no matter how he tries to charm or bully." Janet nodded. Then we set up the Harris Scholarship Foundation, endowed, protected by trust law. It will outlive both of us. The paperwork was thick, each page dense with legal protections. I signed them all, feeling with each stroke of the pen that I was chiseling my name into stone. Claudine Harris. Not just a mother, not just a nurse, but a woman who transformed betrayal into legacy. When the bank transferred the initial funds, $2 million in liquid assets, into the foundation account, I felt the ground shift beneath me. I had not only stripped Derek of his inheritance, I had redirected it into the hands of strangers who would carry my name forward with gratitude. That was power Derek would never wield because he had never learned to give without strings attached. Of course, he did not accept it quietly. Days later, he appeared again, this time, not at my door, but at my workplace, the community clinic where I still volunteered part-time. He stormed into the waiting area, startling patients, his voice raised. "You're ruining me, Mom. Do you understand? People are laughing at me. My job is at risk, and now I find out you gave away everything that should be mine." I rose slowly from behind the counter, every eye in the room fixed on us. Derek, I said calmly, you ruined yourself. I simply stopped pretending you hadn't. His face flushed red veins standing out on his temples. You'll regret this. When you're old and sick and alone, don't expect me to come running. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. You already abandoned me when you called me nothing. I have nothing left to lose with you. Security escorted him out, his protests echoing down the hallway. Patients watched with wide eyes, and when the door closed behind him, a woman in the waiting area reached for my hand. You're brave, she whispered. I wish I had your courage with my own children. Her words warmed me. I realized then that what I was doing wasn't just for me. It was for every parent who had ever been discarded after giving everything. The following week, the Harris Scholarship Foundation held its first press conference. Janet stood beside me at a podium in front of local reporters, the new foundation logo gleaming on a banner behind us. Cameras flashed, microphones clustered. My voice trembled at first, but then steadied as I spoke. This foundation is dedicated to students who want to serve their communities through nursing. It is built not out of bitterness, but out of a belief that sacrifice should mean something, that respect should be mutual, and that legacy belongs to those who earn it. The applause that followed was real, not polite. In that moment, I felt seen in a way I never had before. But consequences for Derek and Monique only deepened. Derek's employer, a financial firm, took notice of the viral video. Clients expressed discomfort at working with a man who publicly humiliated his own mother. Within a month, Derek was quietly let go. Monique, who had boasted about marrying into wealth, found herself mocked online as the woman who laughed while a son belittled the mother who raised him. Their once perfect social media profiles filled with scorn and ridicule. They tried to fight back. Monique uploaded a shaky video claiming I had always been controlling, that Derek's words had been misunderstood. But the internet is ruthless, and the original footage kept resurfacing, played side by side with her excuses. No one believed her. Then came the letter. Derek's lawyer sent me a demand claiming I had been coerced into changing my will, that I was mentally unfit, that the foundation was a fraudulent maneuver. I brought the letter straight to Janet. She read it, then tossed it aside with a dry laugh. Empty threats, she said. He can try to contest, but the documents are airtight. If he pushes, he'll only humiliate himself further in court. Still, the audacity burned me. My own son was willing to drag me through legal battles to claw at money he no longer deserved. That night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, I whispered aloud to the empty room, "So be it. If it's war he wants, I will fight with the law at my side." I began gathering more than just legal protections. I collected receipts records of every tuition payment, every loan I had taken, every hospital shift logged during Derek's upbringing. If the court ever asked whether I had provided for him, I would show them the truth in black and white decades of sacrifice, every cent accounted for. I was preparing not only for defense, but also for exposure. If Derek insisted on dragging me into the light, I would drag every selfish act of his into it with me. But the court battle never came. Perhaps his lawyer warned him of the futility, or perhaps the weight of public opinion finally crushed his arrogance. Instead, he went silent. The calls stopped, the letters ceased, and the once boastful man who had declared me nothing faded into the shadows of his own disgrace. Meanwhile, the foundation flourished. Applications poured in from young men and women desperate to study nursing but unable to afford it. Reading their letters, I wept not from sorrow, but from recognition. These were the children I wanted to support, the ones who would not forget the hands that lifted them. Months later, I attended the first award ceremony. 5 students stood on stage holding certificates that bore my name. Their families clapped, tears streaming down their faces, gratitude shining in their eyes. As I handed each student their scholarship, I felt something heal inside me. Derek had taken my love and twisted it into shame, but these students turned my pain into purpose. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She was barely 19, her hands trembling as she shook mine. "Mrs. Harris," she said softly, "because of you, I can be the first in my family to go to college. I won't let you down." Her words lodged in my heart. I realized then that revenge was never the true goal. Justice was, and justice had been served. Derek had been denied what he thought he was entitled to, stripped of the inheritance he mocked. I had reclaimed my dignity, transformed humiliation into legacy, and in doing so, I had written the final chapter of our story on my terms. Standing there, surrounded by gratitude, I thought back to that church, to the moment when Derek had dismissed me as nothing. He had believed those words would define me forever, but in truth, they had only lit the fire that forged me into something stronger. I had not been erased. I had been reborn. The months that followed were quieter, but the quiet did not feel like emptiness. It felt like peace. For the first time in years, I woke without the heavy ache of wondering what Derek needed, what bill of his I would be asked to cover, what sacrifice I would have to make next. The mornings were mine now. I brewed coffee slowly, let the sun spill across my kitchen table, and opened letters from scholarship recipients who wrote with gratitude so genuine it made my chest swell. The Harris Scholarship Foundation grew faster than I ever expected. Word of mouth spread among hospitals, nursing schools, and churches. Students who had once been on the verge of giving up were suddenly given second chances. Some sent me pictures of themselves in scrubs, smiling with stethoscopes around their necks. Others wrote about their plans to serve communities that had long been neglected. Each letter was a bomb-proof that the wealth I had built through decades of struggle was finally being used as it was meant to be, to lift, not to bind. Meanwhile, Derek and Monique slipped further into obscurity. I heard through family that Derek had been unable to find steady work after losing his position at the firm. His arrogance, once his weapon, now made him unemployable. Employers had seen the video, clients had seen the fallout, and no resume could erase the memory of a man who mocked his own mother at the altar. Monique, whose pride had been built on the promise of wealth and status, found herself embarrassed at social gatherings. Friends who once toasted their marriage now avoided their calls. One afternoon while grocery shopping, I spotted them in the same store. Derek's shoulders hunched as though the weight of shame pressed him down. Monique clutched a nearly empty basket, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. Our eyes met for a brief moment, and in that glance, I saw no arrogance, no triumph, only regret. He turned away quickly, pretending to study the labels on a can of beans, but the damage was already done. He knew I had seen what he had become. I walked past without a word. I felt no need to confront, no need to wound further. The consequences were already written into his life. My silence was louder than any speech I could have given. At home that evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun sink low. My neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, waved from across the street. She had been at the wedding, had seen everything unfold. She crossed over and sat beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "Claudine," she said gently, "I've never seen anyone handle betrayal with such strength. You turned it into something the whole community can admire." I smiled faintly. "Strength is just pain that learned how to stand up." She patted my hand, her eyes glistening. "Whatever they lost, you've gained tenfold." Her words stayed with me. I realized that revenge had never been about destruction. It was about balance, about correcting a wrong so deep it threatened to define me. By cutting Derek out of my will and building something greater, I had ensured that his cruelty would not be my legacy. My legacy was hope, education, dignity restored. As the first anniversary of the foundation approached, we organized a celebration at the community center. Dozens of students and their families gathered, their faces alight with joy. The stage was decorated with simple flowers, the banner reading Harris Scholarship Foundation Building Futures Honoring Sacrifice. When I stepped up to the podium, applause thundered, echoing off the walls. I spoke from my heart. A year ago, I was humiliated in front of people I loved. A year ago, I thought my life had been reduced to nothing. But today, I stand before you with proof that humiliation does not have the final word. We can take our pain and shape it into purpose. We can take betrayal and transform it into justice. And we can take brokenness and turn it into legacy. The audience rose to their feet, clapping, cheering. Tears blurred my vision, but they were not the same tears I had shed in that church pew. These were tears of pride, of renewal, of victory. Later that night, as I returned home and placed the bouquet of flowers from the event on my kitchen table, I whispered a silent prayer of thanks. Not for Derek, not for Monique, but for myself. For the courage to walk away, for the strength to fight back, for the wisdom to build something enduring. I no longer ached for Derek's approval. I no longer longed for the son I thought I had. The truth was harsh, but it set me free. He had chosen his path, and I had chosen mine. His was paved with arrogance and collapse. Mine was paved with dignity and legacy. I thought back to the church, to the sting of his words, to the suffocating silence as I walked down the aisle. I remembered how small I had felt, how broken. Now, standing in the same house that had once felt so heavy with disappointment, I realized I was no longer broken. I was whole. I lost a son that day. I said aloud, my voice steady, but I gained my self-respect. And that's worth more than $3 million. I leaned back in my chair, the evening air drifting through the window, and smiled. My story had not ended in shame. It had ended in triumph. And as long as the Harris Scholarship lived on, so would I.